The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 6th day of this 7-day sesshin, and in fact there are only 4 hours, a few hours, no, it's more than 4 of it, only a few more hours to reach day 7. So it's such an important time, important and impotent both. And because you've been sitting all these days ahead, you've got a great deal of Joriki, you've got increased focus and presence, even though you may or may not recognize it. And it is really important to not think ahead, but to think right deep into your belly and go beneath that even. I always have had a sense of going within, as the Korean Chan master, Sun master from centuries ago said, turn the light inward and trace the radiance down to its source. And it goes down, 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 down. You can imagine a big boulder sinking deep into the middle of the ocean. I think the deepest part of the ocean is several miles deep, actually. I can't remember, something or other trench. At any rate, just imagine that this is a bottomless depth, and that it is your curiosity, your need to know, that is sinking deeply, like that boulder, slowly down, deep within. Turn the light inward and trace the radiance down to its source. Today I'd like to share with you an email that came to me, actually it was several years ago, from someone who had just done their first sesshin. This person had done, a few days of sesshin, but never a full 7-day sesshin. Now let me read this. Being a bit of a newcomer in Zen practice, I was overcome with relief at the clarity that I felt upon my return from a recent sesshin atop beautiful mountains at Mountain Gate. I found that even though I had come down the mountain to face the most painful and difficult decision of my life, somehow a deep sense of peace and clarity prevailed amid the pain in my heart. As I went through the next weeks, however, I felt this peace and clarity slowly slip away, and found that I was clinging to it with somewhat a maddening relentlessness. Despite my determination to practice regularly, I have felt caught again in the emotions and heavy heart, and have had a very difficult time focusing. I wonder why I seem to have regressed. Where has the clarity gone? Is my practice now somehow just not good enough? This is, I think everybody can relate to that story. Maybe we don't go home to an extremely painful decision, but we even if we're not going home outside of the Zen, if we're going home to our room at Mountain Gate, if we're resident here, still, this is something that happens after sesshin. We get deeper and deeper and deeper, and don't even realize that we're getting deeper often. And that's actually a good sign that you don't realize that you're getting deeper, because that means you are getting deeper and not paying attention to externals. But this deep focus that comes from almost all day long zazen and into the night, because I think pretty much all of you have been doing a lot of yasa, which is admirable. But then when we drop back into our daily life of sitting less because we have other things that are calling upon us, including work practice, it is not so easy to remain in that let go mind state that allowed the peace and clarity to come forth, to be revealed, really. Because that's what our mind really is, utter clarity. Let me share another thing from Kalu Rinpoche, who was an eminent teacher in the Tibetan tradition. Let's see where it is. Uh-oh. It might still be at the printer. Hold on a minute. I will go get it. Mind has two faces. This is from Luminous Mind by Kalu Rinpoche. Mind has two faces, which are two aspects of one reality. These are enlightened and illusion, enlightenment and illusion. Enlightenment is a state of pure mind. It is non-dualistic, knowing, and called primordial wisdom. Its experiences are authentic. That is, they are without illusion. Pure mind is free and endowed with numerous qualities. And everyone is endowed with that pure mind. Otherwise, we couldn't come to awakening. This is very important for everyone to understand, that we all have that capacity. It's built in. It is who we are. We cannot not be with it. Illusion is a state of mind, of impure mind. Its mode of knowledge is dichotomous or dualistic. It is the conditioned consciousness. A conditioned consciousness. That's a different way of saying that as we are born, and even in the process of birth, and even before birth, conditioning can begin. Because we are cognizant of experiences within the womb. That's actually been known. And actually, my older son remembers some things. But as we are born and we enter a new environment and we grow and we have experiences and we are either well cared for or not so well cared for, or have even traumatic experiences, even if we are well cared for, then we begin to get ideas about who we think we are. We begin to develop a self-image that is inaccurate and based only on conditioning and the assumptions that we developed as a result of those experiences. This is the impure mind in action. Illusion is a state of impure mind. Its mode of knowing is dichotomous and dualistic. It is the conditioned consciousness. Its experiences are tainted by illusion. Impure mind is conditioned and endowed with much suffering. Ordinary beings experience this state of impure, deluded mind as the habitual state. Pure, enlightened mind is a state in which mind realizes its own nature as free of habitual conditioning and the suffering associated with this. This is the enlightenment state of a Buddha. And he goes on to say, as I just said, that everyone is endowed with this innately. So what this person experienced, who I read the email from initially, is getting closer and closer and closer, as we all do, to this awareness of this pure mind that is our basis of being. And then as we leave the Zendo and aren't able to sit as much, we begin to withdraw from that awareness unwittingly. We may try to hold on to it, but it's going to slip from our grasp. One way to keep it closer to our experience is to all day, all through the day, work on presence, work on awareness. This is absolutely vital. This is why practice in activity is so important. This is why we sit facing across the Zendo at each other so that we're not facing a blank wall and have nothing to compete with what we may realize. When people do go to Sesshin and face a blank wall, they can go deeper at first than if we sit facing each other. And for example, at Sogenji are we not only facing each other, but the person carrying the Keisaku is going back and forth in front of us. And we're hearing people getting struck with a Keisaku, or maybe even asking for it ourselves. And so there's a lot of distraction in the Zendo. We have somewhat less distraction here because although we are sitting facing each other, that we don't use the Keisaku or the Kyosaku, so there is nobody walking in front of you. However, we have some other really great, challenging distractions named Sophie and Boo, and also the extremely loud noise of the brand new air purifier that turns out to be malfunctioning and is being sent back. So there's a lot of occasion for distractions, even in the midst of a sesshin, and that's actually quite good. We don't want to go to a remote place to do zazen. Jack Kornfield discovered that when he was for 5 years in a forest monastery in Thailand under the great master Ajahn Chah. And because the monks are all separate, they have their own little huts called kutis, and they spend their day in meditation or sweeping their paths. And once a day, they will come together for a common meal in silence. And on occasion, they will also come together to hear the teacher speak. But otherwise, they're alone, as if they were facing a blank wall. And he discovered after 5 years of this, he thought he was in pretty good shape. And he went back to New York City and discovered that there were a lot of things he had not had the chance to encounter. And so he decided to go back to school and become a clinical psychologist. I believe he's a PhD psychologist because he wanted to understand how to continue to let go. And now, of course, for a long time, he's been a Vipassana Buddhist teacher. Having a challenge in our daily life, and yet having our practice, offers us a chance to meet those challenges in a way that we can transform them into ways of coming to awakening. This is how, for example, Kyogen in ancient China, who felt like he was no good for the monastery and left because he felt like he just couldn't come to awakening. He just couldn't fathom his koan. And so he thought, well, the least he could do would be to take care of the grave of an old master whose grave had fallen into disrepair. And so he went there and lived there for several years, and every day he swept, and every day he continued his perplexity, his questioning of that koan. And one day, as he was sweeping the area around the tomb, his broom caught a piece of tile, and it hit a bamboo, made a clap sound, and he was so focused that it broke his mind open and he became enlightened. Reyun was enlightened by the sight of peach blossoms blooming. Hakuin had his first kensho by hearing the sound of the big bell tolling early in the morning at the temple he was visiting. For Courtois had a profound opening as she glanced at her little desk in her bedroom on a break from college, preceded by a tremendous amount of deepening focusing on her own koan, which was, is there an underlying truth that is always true, regardless of circumstances? And of course there is. It is our Buddha nature. And we, of course, have different koans to work on that. And also we have this incredibly potent practice of Susok'kan, the extended out-breath. It isn't impotent, as I said earlier, it is very potent. So we have the tools, but it takes time. It takes time, and one evidence of the grasping that keeps us trapped is what we find as we leave a sesshin, or even a sitting, but more likely a sesshin where we've gone deeper, and find that as the days went by after the sesshin, that the clarity and peace that we may have experienced in the sesshin, particularly late in the sesshin, gradually evaporates. And we will try to hang on to it, but it'll still slip through our fingers unless we continue to allow it to let go. Don't chase it, and don't try to find it again, but go back to the practice and experience that perplexity and follow that perplexity deep out of the in-breath, the out-breath. And this way, that practice continues underground, not as obviously strong as when it's in sesshin, but it does continue. There are many moments during the day when there's a transition, where we are about to go somewhere. And so we leave the building we're in and we go on a walk, for example. So right then we can choose to be as present as possible in that walk, to notice absolutely clearly everything. And you can also, if you're, for example, you have to go to the toilet, you're not going to be moving around much, and so you can just stop and do one extended long breath. One moment of Susok'kan, so fully present with that it's like an entire vacation. And if you do it fully, it will function like that. It'll function as if you were plunged right back into sesshin. And it will have great benefit, even though it's only one breath. But that's only if you don't multitask with it. If you don't go into this transition and bring whatever concerns you had before you left whatever room you were in, and half to be caught up in that, and half trying to do the extended out-breath. No, it has to be fully present, extended out-breath. Otherwise, it doesn't have the power to deepen your practice. That's a very dynamite way to do deepening practice, even in the midst of activity, because there are always those transitions. You're always going to sit down and eat, and perhaps that's part of the role that saying grace can have. A focus, a temporary letting go of hunger of judgment and what you're going to eat, because so often we do judge. Oh, I don't like that, or whatever. But we have so many of those transition points in our life that we have those opportunities all the time. Walking to our car to go somewhere, stop. You can put your hand on the handle after you've unlocked it and just sink into your hara with this deep, deep questioning, letting everything else go for that breath, and then proceed onward. The same way when you return home, turn off the motor before you get out. One long, totally experienced breath full of the perplexity. Who am I? What is my face before my parents were born? Only you're not voicing it. It's just translated into perplexity, into longing, into deep longing to return to becoming that mind state. Then you leave your car and go into your house or wherever you're living in and carry on. But those are just a few of the times in the day when you can really do that. Thich Nhat Hanh had what he called the mindfulness bell, that he would ring every hour, and at the ringing of that mindfulness bell, people would stop and focus, become present. That's what mindfulness is all about. And what we will find out as we continue that practice, even in those tiny little moments, is that they are quite potent if they are fully entered into. And we'll find ourselves becoming more present just with everything. We pick up a fork to start eating dinner, and the fork seems like an amazing tool. Or we go and sit down at our desk. It's a brand new experience. This desk, which we never really saw before, but when we are fully present at it, is quite amazing. It also is part of when we run into challenging emotions. When Yongey Mingyu Rinpoche was a kid, and he went to his first long retreat, that's 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, typical extended retreat in the Tibetan Buddhist system, where there's a lot of study, a lot of meditation, and a lot of chanting. And when he would go into the group and with the chanting, he would get extreme panic attacks. He's 13 years old. He's been having panic attacks since he was a little kid. And he finally gets just fed up with it. And he decides he's going to stay in his room until he has mastered letting go of panic attacks. And so he did that for 3 days. He stayed as present as he could with his body and the sensations of that panic. And after 3 days, he was let go, and it never reappeared, because he had put his full attention into experiencing the bodily energies that represented a panic attack. This is a tool that everyone has. We're born with it. Children learn how to be in this culture that they're born into by paying attention. And because their cognitive, I don't know if I would say cognitive, but their thinking brain doesn't come online until they're about a year and a half old, according to research. And so, they certainly survive until the year and a half. In most cases, I mean, yes, there is sudden death syndrome and a few other things. Many things can happen to children, even in the first weeks of their life, even before they're born, it can happen. But if they survive long enough, they'll grow and they'll begin to be able to think. But before that, for a year and a half, they've survived fine. They've learned to communicate when they're unhappy, when they're hungry, when they're wet and they need their diaper changed, when they're not feeling well. I remember my then 3-year-old son pulling at his ear and grimacing and making signs of not being happy. And he had an ear infection. That's kind of a classic one. But they learn to eat, they learn to suck, right, as they're born, basically. And in some cases, there are images of babies in the womb sucking their thumbs. So they learn to do that, in some cases, way before they're born even. So there's plenty that we already know. And instead of thinking our way through life in those early months, we feel our way through life. We experience our way through life. And it is this way of experiencing our way through life that is a gift that we tend to get educated out of being in contact with. And so we get more and more into living out of our heads. Not everybody does that, but most people do. And particularly if we're well educated, we're taught that thinking is the way to live. It's the way to survive. So unfortunately, it's not the only way. In fact, it's mainly not the way. We tune into experiences and are free then to become them. And in freedom to become them, we become free of the need to grasp at anything else, including a sense of self-protection, a sense of a false face to hide behind. And we don't realize that face is false. We just know, we just develop inclinations from our young experiences and our later experiences to be wary of life, to be a little bit anxious around other people, particularly if we've had a negative experience, especially negative experience when we were little. It's one of the ways adverse childhood experiences can actually affect people, even when they're tiny. There have been experiments which are no longer allowed because they're really unethical at this point. But there are other times when events that are normal were recorded. For example, a mother giving birth to another child, and the older child being a year and a half, 2 years old, and being sent to a nursery while mom is gone, and they don't understand why mom is not there to be with them. And so when mom comes back, they're leery of her. They're not sure she's not going to disappear on them again. And so they develop that almost push me pull you relationship with mom, and then that can get generalized into other relationships as well, particularly as they grow older. Can I trust this person? Because had an experience that was pretty potent where I couldn't trust, only we don't even recognize that necessarily. These things begin to come up in our zazen and are potentially, if we're not careful, ways that will stop us in our tracks and cause us enough discomfort that we'll choose to stop practice, which is a sad state of affairs, because when these things come up, they've been buried within, and it's a chance to work with the energy of them and release them through the felt sense. So when people become discouraged, and when we find that we leave sesshin, especially if we've been not doing very many sesshin or just one sesshin, and find that level of peace and like-goness that we had developed vanishes, we're pretty concerned about that. But as we go deeper in our practice, we realize that things come and things go. And eventually we reach a place where it's fine. We know it's not a permanent situation. We know things change. We know that it doesn't reflect on us personally. And we begin to let go of an us personally anyway and become naturally more free. This is the natural progress of our practice if we persist. And of course, it's very important to persist if we're to reach what we sense we can. We're not here in sesshin just because we feel like it'd be a great thing to go to sesshin. Although there is a story, actually it's a true story, about a Britisher who had everything. He was quite wealthy at a young age from his own gifts, and had a flat in a very good area of London, and went to parties with important people and had high-flying friends, and something wasn't complete about that. There was something missing. And so there was an ad in a newspaper in London that said, "A week's vacation at a Zen temple in Japan." Any of you who have been to sesshin in Japan know that that's really an interesting term, a week's vacation. And so he went, and it was a week of zazen. But during a break time, he would be in the garden of the temple, and there was a shakuhachi master that would practice there. This is not uncommon. These temple gardens are they have such a beautiful energy because they've been so carefully attended with focus and awareness for so many centuries normally, that there's that deeply quiet, totally focused, present energy in them. Even the famous rock garden that you'll see in all kinds of garden books, the rock garden at Ryoanji, turns out that pretty much every Zen temple has got a rock garden, including where I used to do solo retreats in Kyoto. But this one is quite famous. And the energy there is incredible. Because I was in robes, I could go in very early before anybody else showed up, because I could go in before it opened and just sit there. And I truly envied a friend of mine who was a monk under Morinaga Soko-roshi at a sub-temple there, who told me once that they used to climb over the wall and do zazen, do yaza in that garden. There are steps. There's a platform and steps down to it, and you can sit on the platform sort of like a veranda, a deck, and just feel that energy, even though these days it's not a practicing temple. The sub-temple, one of the sub-temples, Daishuin, is, but another sub-temple focuses on being a tofu restaurant. It's got really good tofu. But Ryo-Anji is simply, I think, making its money, surviving by people coming to see that garden because it's so famous. And you have hosts of school kids. You have 50 school kids who are chatting and texting on their phones and not paying any attention at all to the garden. And I've sat in the midst of them and still feeling that great depth that is born of attention and awareness for so many centuries in that space. Joko Beck says something about that. She writes, "The mark of mature practice is simply the ability more and more and more to notice what's going on and not be caught by it." Easy talking about, but probably 15 to 20 years of hard practice are needed before we are likely to have that good bit of it, that good bit of the time, before we are like that, a good bit of time, of the time. And that's not the final stage, when there is no object, no person, no event, no thinking in the world with which I identify, by which I'm caught, when there is no object and no observing self, then there is a flip into what, if you wish to give it a name, is the enlightenment state. It takes time. It takes practice. Not to get discouraged, no matter how many years you are practicing. The more deeply you can bring yourself to practice, the sooner that covering of illusion will be seen through, little by little, and you will become more and more free. If you do sporadic practice, heaven knows how long it'll take. And this has been a challenge for people, particularly for people who have a sort of a push-me-pull-you relationship with practice, and they'll go to a sesshin and experience the depths of it. And then even some people, towards the end of sesshin, get discouraged. And the importance is to tune into that discouragement if that happens to you, and to keep on going. Because so often, something like discouragement will come up in a sesshin, and if we stay present with it, we'll move through it into a deeper place. These things like discouragement with like Makyo come up to sort of try to shoot down our practice. And just like when the Buddha was doing his deep zazen, and Mara came to him first with the tantalizing daughters who danced in front of the Buddha, trying to lure him away, and it didn't work. And so then he tried pain, as the metaphor goes, with his hordes of demons hurling boiling mud and spears and lances at the Buddha. I'm not sure. Well, I do know one person, actually, who never had any pain in Zazen, but his problem was sleepiness. And at one sesshin, he was doing yaza on the tan, facing the wall, and he fell asleep and went over backwards onto the floor. He never sat zazen on the tan, and after that, he only sat in a chair. So if he fell asleep, he'd go frontwards. We have all these things that are halfway intended to inhibit us, stop us in our practice. And of course, we all know that the Buddhist devil Mara finally had one last ploy, and that was to taunt the Buddha and say he was not worthy. You can't do this. We have our own Mara in our heads, who often says the same things. And the Buddha said, I don't think so. And he touched the ground to witness that he was worthy. Every one of us is worthy. But the basis of practice is increasing attention and awareness at the expense of letting go other involvements during the time of meditation, during the time of focus, and allowing that deep yearning to be free. Drive the out-breath out as far as it can go, over and over and over again. And as one person long ago in Rochester who had a kensho and a sesshin wrote afterwards, when I entered the zendo at the beginning of sesshin, I felt like I had to virtually nail myself to the mat. I wanted to flee. But I stayed, and it was very difficult. But in the end, she had a kensho. And afterwards she said, this practice is truly bodhisattvic. First, it shows us where we're caught. And then it sets us free. And that assumes that we don't find being caught an end to practice, but that we take that as a good sign, because we can clear out a place where we are caught in some level of clinging, in some level of illusion. And as we meet these experiences and become free of them because we have tuned in, anyone who has done therapy using the felt sense or has learned the felt sense, to tune into the felt sense, has a real advantage in that, because that's how you work with these things. And, as I said in the very beginning, every single person is endowed with this mind of enlightenment and the covering over of it with the mind of delusion. And as you see through delusion, as you let go of clinging, you will become free. I guarantee it, if you're willing to stick it out long enough. I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.